This approach is new school, it's mamby-pamby. We all have three basic psychological needs. You can't control how other people perform. All you can control is yourself. Hard work, effort, intensity, perseverance. There's four main types of achievement goals. They relate to how we judge our own success. We can accelerate and improve their ability to cope under pressure by giving them different coping strategies. It's not just about sport, it's about any form of performance. It's about being able to practice under pressure when you do it for real. There's a higher prevalence of mental health illness among elite athletes. Is being an elite athlete good for your health? It probably isn't.
My name is Kyla Colbin. You're listening to my interview with Professor Adam Nicholls, and this is the Hunger and Heart Podcast. Enjoy the show. Hello, my name is Kyla Colbin, and welcome to episode 12 of Hunger and Heart, a podcast on the intersection of wild ambition and fierce compassion. My guest today is Adam Nicholls. Adam is a professor at the University of Hull. He researches the factors that predict doping among adolescent athletes, as well as how athletes cope and manage their emotions. His research has been funded by organizations including the International Olympic Committee and the World Anti-Doping Organization. He also won the silver medal in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu at the 2021 British Open. In this conversation, we talk about the four types of achievement goals, the three basic psychological needs, and the two types of motivational climate. So here you are, my conversation with Adam Nicholls. What's your experience with wild ambition and fierce compassion?
Yeah, I really agree with this, that there's a myth that the two can't be separated. But do you know what? I've not actually had a leader who can do both. I don't think. Maybe one early in my career who can give the compassion and give the empathy, and also know that you can drive ambition and drive results. And I think it's disappointing that. I definitely think it's a skill. And I think people think it's either one or the other.
Can I just make sure I've understood you correctly? Did you just say you have not had a leader in your career who has been able to do both?
No, I don't think I have, no. Maybe one. Maybe
Really?
one. Yeah.
And tell me about that one.
I think he got the balance right. He knew he supported everybody. He got the balance right, actually. He could do that, and he got results. And I think he understood that you got results and you got the best out of people by supporting them, by understanding about them, by caring about them. And I'd say that's the only one I've had. The rest, I think, are more, this is what you need to do this by then, off you go and do it.
Right. So that's your personal experience. Of course, your research into sports psychology and athletes and what helps them perform. What does your research reveal, and how does it contrast with what you've had the lived experience?
Yeah, I study a lot of the American sports coaches, the collegiate coaches, NBA coaches, NFL coaches. And one thing when I write, I read interviews about the players, I read excerpts from their own interviews, is that the very best leaders, they're tough, performance-driven, results-driven, but they also love and care for their athletes. So Greg Popovich, who coached San Antonio Spurs for many, many years, a Hall of Fame coach, and one of his assistant coaches said that one thing that Greg Popovich does over and over again is gives honesty and love. So he's tough with the players, he has high demanding environment when they're on the court. But off the court, he loves his players. He wants to know about his players. He supports his players. He forms relationships with his players that last way beyond their playing time together. And he builds very strong bonds. But it's not just him, there's Nick Saban. When you look at all the top coaches over the years, in NFL, NBA, NHL, probably in other sports as well, I think American coaches about how they interact with players. They all seem to have this, they get this right.
Do you think this is a particularly American thing? Is it not something you observed in British or European coaches?
What I'm seeing in the moment with Britain in certainly UK, not all coaches, but a lot of them is like we see this approach is new school, it's mamby pamby. Whereas we have the old school approach, which is shouting at players, holding them to account, which I think you can do. You can still very much do, particularly in sport. There's times when you do need to be forthright. But what I think is really important is that you then after training, that's when you have build the relationships. I don't think we do that well at all in England. I really don't. Yeah, disappointingly, I think we tend to sometimes lag a little bit behind in America what they're doing, and that's one thing I do on LinkedIn. I try and show the alternative way of this love and driven coaching. It makes me laugh sometimes when you look at some of the best leaders. So one of them is Steve Kerr, who's a coach is the Golden State Warriors, and we always see interviews with him, where he shows how much he cares for the players. And it would be a myth not to think deep down under that he'll be a tough character. He's got to be to do what he's done. An absolute, be an absolute ball breaker. He'll get what he wants all the time in terms of standards, players, recruiting, and he'll drive them, he'll push them hard. But then equally he can separate that and show his kindness, his empathy towards the players. And I'm hoping that's what, as in England and the UK, that's what we'll see more of in the future.
Does your research show that an approach that incorporates that kind of care that you see in Greg Popovich or in Steve Kerr, does your research show that that produces more successful results than an approach that exclusively focuses on do what I say, get it done, stop crying, etc.?
Well, it's not my research, but I'm aware of the literature. And what the literature shows, though, this approach, it fulfills a basic psychological need. It fulfills the need of relatedness, which is we all have three main basic psychological needs. And one is the need to feel cared for. And when we feel cared for by our leader, we're more engaged, we have higher levels of well-being, lower levels of anxiety. And actually all of these do drive performance. And that's the thing that I think leaders get wrong is they think that they need to be constantly on at you and driving you and setting you goals to make you perform better. Well, actually, no, by empowering you, by making you feel cared for, making you feel supported, you will probably perform better than you would if you have this, like the carrot and the stick approach, this constant stick. And that's the thing that I think they get wrong. So yeah, their evidence does show that it has so many benefits that yeah, it's the right way to go.
Adam, I'm not going to let you get away with this. You said there are three basic psychological needs. One of them is relatedness, the need to feel cared for. What are the other two?
Yeah, so the other is autonomy, the need to feel in control of what you do and be given a choice. And that's another thing that the best leaders get right. They empower people, they give them choice over what they do, they make them feel part of what they're doing. And then the other one is competence, the need to feel effective. And this comes from feedback and communication from your leader. Every now and again, just reminding people what they're good at, celebrating success, and that's one thing I think leaders need to do more of. But it can't be just a token gesture. It needs to be authentic, and it needs to come from the heart. And yeah, and I think that's really important. And it's not just a superficial, oh yeah, well done, you're doing really well, a group email announcement. It's about, as leaders, it's about getting to know the people that work for you, and then so when you make these praises and this uh, showing your gratitude towards them, it's more realistic, it's more believable. And that's really important. When all these three psychological needs are met, we have higher levels of intrinsic motivation, wanting to do things for ourselves. And that's why it's really, really important. It can empower a workforce.
Adam, you've just summarized the entire premise of this podcast, which is how do we inspire intrinsic motivation through this intersection of caring for people while also having standards? And that standards bit is competence on the one hand, but the autonomy bit is the intrinsic thing, right? That they've got ownership and accountability for how they're showing up and what they do.
Yeah,
I did not realize that I was speaking to the 3 core psychological needs.
you are absolutely the bit of 3 basic psychological needs, and I think that's another thing the best leaders do is they set the standards, but they create an environment in which the players themselves, in terms of sport, they manage the standards. They hold other players to account because they believe in the standards. They own the standards, and that's what the best leaders can do. So it's not the head coach of an organisation remonstrating with the players for being late. It's the other players will sort that out, and they look after that. And that's what effective leaders do. And I'm not saying it's easy, but that's what the best leaders do. They all do that.
Okay, so first, can I just, as I've told you, I do a lot of work with Crusaders Rugby. And in particular, I mean, they all do this, but in particular, Sir Wayne Smith, who's been a guest on this podcast, and Robbie Deans, they are so big on it has to come from the players. And if it doesn't come from the players, it's never going to take hold. They're never going to own it. They're never going to believe it. I'm going to send you after this. I'm going to send you a video of them talking about this that I think you'll enjoy, because they're saying exactly the same thing that you're saying, which is the only way that they get accountability and ownership is for it to come from the players in the first place.
Yeah. And that relates to this basic psychological need of autonomy. You're giving the players an input and a decision about what those standards are. Quite often, top players, they will come up with the same sorts of standards anyway.
Do you think some coaches or leaders are afraid that if they invite players or teammates to set their own goals, that they won't be ambitious enough?
Yeah, I think many coaches that I've worked with or certainly read about is that they're, in the nicest sense, they're control freaks and they don't want to lose control. And by giving players certain elements of control, they feel as though they're losing something. So it's weird because, like, to gain more control, you have to lose a bit of control. So by giving the players a little bit more input into what they do and setting their own goals, then actually they'll you as a coach have a greater control over the organisation because they're going to be doing what you want them to do anyway. I think as well, when we set our own goals, they're more realistic of what we can do, and we've been more willing to buy into them. So even if they might not be as high because we've set them ourselves, we're more invested in them, we're more engaged in them, and then we'd be more likely to achieve them and surpass them.
How does that premise tie in with the idea that sometimes coaches see things in us that we don't believe we're capable of yet, or we don't see ourselves as, we don't see as part of our potential yet?
Yeah. I think that comes from coaches' communication, and I think the best coaches do that. The best coaches and the best leaders often get more out of an individual than they thought was possible. But it goes back to how do they do that? It's probably through love and support and having those strict standards, but telling them they believe in them, so fulfilling their basic psychological needs in terms of competence. So, already I think you're this, this, and this, but with time, with effort, by adhering to these standards and working together, I will get you to this level. I'm an Aston Villa fan in the UK, and we have this amazing coach called Unai Emery, who signs players, and every single player he signs, they get better. They get a lot better. And you've got like a World Cup winner who plays for them, for Villa, and he said that it's the best coaching he's ever had. He's playing the best of his ability through the coach. And he's renowned for being a strict taskmaster, very, very difficult, very hard working in training, very intense in training. But he actually did an interview last week that he was saying outside of training, before training, after training, that's when he has the smiles. That's when he asks the players how they're settling in the country, how they're doing, what they're enjoying, and so he has like it's kind of like two faces: the training face when everything is very serious and work hard, and then pre and post training when he's more caring and more interested in the players' lives. Because when it's training, it's business, you see. And I think it's a great approach. He's Spanish, by the way, Unai Emery, and I think he's amazing.
It reminds me of there's a show on Netflix called The Playbook, A Coach's Rules for Life. And it's five, half-hour episodes, and they talk to each one is a different coach. So Doc Rivers is on it, and Don Chalmers, and Jose. They have an episode with Jose Mourinho, and that episode starts off, this legendary football coach starts off where they're like, tell us about your childhood. And he was like, I'm not going to tell you about my childhood. And they're like, tell us who your inspirations are. He's like, I have no inspirations. I'm the best ever. And just like, he's just completely rejecting their entire premise. And when I saw the beginning of that episode, I was like, whoa, what's with this guy? And by the end of that episode, the thing that came through so clearly was his total devotion to his team and to his players. He was like, he didn't care about the people making the documentary. He didn't care about the audience. He didn't care about the media. He didn't care about, the public. He didn't care about any, he only cared about his players. But it was so clear the depth of his love for his players. And it became, by the end of that episode, completely unsurprising to me that he would be able to get from his players what he has been able to get from them.
Absolutely. And you read a lot of comments about the players, how much they love him too, and how much. Like one of his players now, he said every time the phone rings and it's from him, he gets a bit nervous because that's his boss. And when you read about him, a lot of the things he did were for substitution, where he was actually taking the heat off the players by telling everybody he's this, he's that. People actually forgot about the players. They let the players be, and that was an intentional strategy. He's so clever on what he did, and he would like before they'd have big matches. Chelsea, he would say something quite controversial, or and again it just took the heat from the players. It took the pressure off the players because the focus was on him, and it allowed the players to be more free and just to go and play. He was amazing. He still, he still is now, but there's lots of stuff that comes on about his leadership. And I remember one thing that he said is that quite often the person wearing the captain's armband is not the captain. The captain may be someone else in the team, the true leader. Yeah, he's a very inspirational leader.
It's so interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the literature. You said this is not my research, but I'm familiar with the literature about the three basic psychological needs. I'm curious about your research, and I want to start with I understand that you have one of the core focus areas of your research is the psychosocial factors that predict doping amongst adolescent athletes. So the way I'm interpreting this is like, how can we tell if a young athlete is going to end up doping or not? What can we look at? And can you talk to me about that research? What have you
Yeah,
found?
yeah. So there's a number of risk factors that predict whether athletes will go on to dope. And one thing that we know is that a key risk factor is for young athletes is those who are on a talent pathway and are close to making it to an elite status, securing a professional contract. They're not quite yet there, and they might not ever make that. And they're the ones who are most vulnerable to taking performance enhancing drugs. Sorry, and and other factors. So the extent to which they perceive a benefit from doping. Now that could be securing a professional contract, fame, prize money, and if they believe that they see strong benefits, they also perceive that there is a low risk of getting caught and a low risk of negative side effects, then they're much more likely to dope. And one thing we know is that young athletes, they tend to brush off the perceived risk factors of doping. So it might be that if you don't now, that you might not. The long-term side effects, say cancer, heart problems, cholesterol, etc., might not occur for another 20 or 30 years, and the athletes just dismiss that. And some don't even care. We in some of our research, we went around to different organisations, and when we were there, we did a little survey where we asked the players if you could take performance enhancing drugs now and you'd have a career for 3 years, but then you would have to retire through injury. Would you do it? And all of them said, 80% of them said yes. So they're not caring about the long-term effects. It's very short-termism.
How old were these players?
18, and they were wanting to get professional contracts. And it is so tough because out of those 18 in a professional academy, how many will get contracts? 2 or 3 maybe at the most. There's such a sport. It's the same with it. I think in the Premiership, our Premiership football, soccer, as it is in England, I think it's about 0.1% will play Premiership football. So there's a massive attrition rate. Those who don't make it. And again, if you're one of those who are close, again, you could be the one who may be at risk of doping. We know as well that the family has an impact as well, the extent to which if your family supports doping or your coach is doing, you might not think, well, why would coaches support that? But in many sports, there's been examples where it's the coaches who are the instigators of the drug taking.
So based on your research, what can people do? And when I say what can people do, my question really is, what is the if you can find these transferable insight or insights that these are factors that drive people to engage in risky and potentially self-damaging behavior. And if we don't want people to engage in risky and potentially self-damaging behavior, but we do want to support them to strive for excellence, what can we do instead?
Yeah, and this was part of the program. So I was lucky enough that my research was funded by the International Olympic Committee, and we created a program called I Play Clean. So if any of your listeners are interested, the website is still out there, www.iplayclean.co.uk. We can provide the links to the shows, and that's what we did. So we wanted people their goals to be more self-determined, so focusing on themselves in terms of themselves improving. We looked at morality. So we created an educational program. It's quite a few years since I did that now. An educational program with, I think it was about 10 modules, where we created an education program where things that we wanted the players to focus on to reduce the prevalence of doping. So one of them was considering the ethics of cheating, health implications, focusing on the players wanting to become better for themselves and making their performance self-referenced as opposed to comparing themselves to others. Because these are all backed and linked to athletes being less likely to dope. And we also had a section in there for coaches and parents regarding how they can create environments to reduce the likelihood of athletes taking bad substances. So focusing on the coach-athlete relationship. That was really important. And also just giving them information about substances, performance enhancing drugs, because a lot of people just don't know about them. They don't know about the dangers of them. They don't know about the risks of buying supplements that can be contaminated. So how to buy supplements correctly, so make sure you get batch tested supplements.
You mentioned self-reference success, and you recently shared a video on LinkedIn, which, by the way, for everyone listening, Adam's LinkedIn is really exceptional, and I recommend following him on there. He shares some really good stuff. You recently shared a video that was a young man, I don't remember his name, completing a race, and he was being interviewed at the end of the race. And they say, "How do you feel you went?" And he said, "That was fantastic. It was a personal best for me." And the interviewer said, "You've got to be a bit disappointed by the finish there." And I imagine that he was pipped at the finish by someone else. And this athlete's immediate response was, "Why? I just ran the fastest race I've run all year. Mark is an excellent athlete. He just happens to be faster than I am right now." I was so moved by that video. It's about 30 seconds. Can you talk to me about self-reference success and what's important about it?
Yeah, so there's four main types of achievement goals, and what it is, they relate to how we judge our own success. And there are 4 different types. So we can have mastery approach goals, in which we're focused and we judge success on being better than we were. So it's about improvement. And then you have mastery approach, which is if you're going into any event, it's like, I don't want to be worse than I was yesterday. Or I don't want to have a performance worse than a previous standard. So it's a difference. One is about being better than you can be, or better than you have been before. One is about not being worse. And then you also have goals that are not self-referenced. These are normative goals, and so one of them is mastery approach. So if I'm on a team, it's like I want to be the best player on my team. If we're doing sprints, if we're doing whatever the fitness test may be, bronco running, whatever it may be, I want to be the best. But then mastery, performance avoidance, is about not wanting to be worse. So we've got some fitness tests. I don't care where I am. I just don't want to be the last. I don't want to be the worst person in the Broncos. I don't want to be the last. So, so self-reference goals are about only linking performance to yourself. So the athlete in the video, I remember now, it's called Mike Pig, and he was happy with his performance because he'd run a personal best. He'd run a race time that he was happy with. So, so no matter where he finished, his performance, his idea of success was self-referenced. And we know this is really important to have self-reference goals because it links in, again, it's another thing that feeds into intrinsic motivation. It feeds into well-being. It feeds into how we react to stress. We react to stress more effectively when our goals are self-referenced. And that's one thing I think when working with coaches, when working with athletes, it's about encouraging them to have self-reference goals, but focusing on improvement. What element would they like to improve upon? It could be communication, if they're a coach. If they're an athlete, it might be a specific element of their performance. It's always about this focus on self-referenced improvement. And then when you do that and you get that, you're not disappointed by things that you can't control. You can't control how other people run or how other people perform. So there's no point really getting disappointed by your performance in comparison to other people because you can't control it. All you can control is yourself. And I read this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it now, and it really stuck with me about performance because you can perform to your absolute best and lose, but on another day you can perform very poorly and win. And it just shows that the competition is very, you shouldn't really be judging your standards based on results in outcomes of competition because it's in some ways it's meaningless. It doesn't relate to your own performance, and I think understanding that is something that I think is really, really important.
I find this so fascinating. One of the other guests that I've had on the podcast is Joe Kennedy, who is the director of athletics and sports leadership at the Obama Presidential Center, and who was an NBA coach, and whose dad was a legendary basketball coach. And he said almost the exact same line that you just said. In our conversation, he said, you can be winning, but just barely, and you can be losing, but on the path to success. And just the other day, I was the Crusaders are just heading into the grand final for the Super Rugby competition for this year, this coming Saturday. And I was watching a game last week with my family, and I said, I prefer when a team wins by a point than when a team wins by 50 points. Because if a team wins by a point, I know that they have left everything on the field. And if they win by 50 points, I always have a wondering of, were they at the end just kind of, not really just kind of having a laugh about it. And I want to see people at the absolute edge of their capacity and their capability. I find it way more invigorating as a viewer, as a fan, than I do when it's a game that's kind of mismatched.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a spectator myself, you always want close matches that go down to the end. And like you say, they're the matches where you know that both teams have pushed it to the absolute limit. They're both going for it. They're both doing everything they can because they're both in within a chance of winning. I think sometimes, like particularly with rugby, even if you're like 9 points clear, with 4 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go, you know that they've got to score twice. It just doesn't have that same intensity, does it? Whereas when you're within a try or within 3 points, then that's when the games are really intense at the end because that's when everyone's giving their all. And I think they're the games when as well, which they reveal the character, they reveal the ethos of a team to see how they respond to those tough situations. I'm sure as professional coaches we'll be quite happy to be winning by 50 every game though. But again, when you do that, you're not testing yourselves either. And I think that's what a problem with with New Zealand over the past many years is that sometimes between World Cups they wouldn't really have a test. They wouldn't really have a. And so when it came down to it, the World Cup quarter final, I'm thinking of 2007 now, going back, when actually they weren't used to that intensity and whereas obviously now and they built on that and they are now. But I think it's important to have those close matches, definitely.
Mm. I think you'll have evoked some residual trauma in some of our Kiwi listeners here with that
Yeah,
2007 reference.
yeah,
It's interesting because what I'm hearing there is there's this kind of intersection between self-reference success and creating the conditions that can bring out in us everything that we are capable of. And is that something that emerged from the research as well? This concept of yes, I want to be better than I was, but me by myself, it's hard for me just by myself to go out and push myself to be better than like I get the external environment to help me drive to be as good as I possibly can.
yeah. So one thing we talk about there is called the motivational climate, and it's the coach that sets this, and he or she determines this by the way in which they reward the way in which they reward success. So if you get a coach who emphasizes effort and improvement and rewards that, that is known as a mastery motivational climate. And this is where the coach is emphasizing and pushing players to improve, to get better. And when they see improvements, they reward it. Whereas a performance environment is which the environments in which the coaches they just generally focus on rewarding the player who might have won a particular training session. They're all about results. They regard the players conditionally. So if a player has performed well, they'll be nice to them. If a player has not performed well, they don't have that same love for them on that particular day. And again, we know that the climates, these mastery motivational climates, are linked with so many positive outcomes because the players are, there is this emphasis on improvement, this emphasis on getting better, and it's up to the coach to create training sessions help the players to improve. But then also the key is that the coaches reward this behaviour. And we know that at kind of grassroots sports, this is really important. We know at elite level that players do value that, but they also do like to compete against each other, in a training session. So it's about getting that balance right, but it does come from the coach, and yeah, it is really really important. And again, the top coaches get this right. Gino Auriemma, the Connecticut coach, women's basketball coach, he talks about this all the time.
You just mentioned grassroots coaches. Um, at what age can parents start to see potential in their young athletes and start to try to work to bring about that potential? Like, talk to me about, there are lots of parents out there who have big ambitions for their kids. Talk to me about when it's appropriate and when it's not to start to hold kids to higher standards for performance.
Well, I think probably some parents think they can see a success in their children when they're about two, can't they? It's really interesting. I just put a post up today on LinkedIn by Wayne Goldsmith. I think he might be New Zealander, and he's about not worshipping physical talent. No, he was Australian actually. So he worked for the Australian Institute of Sport, and between 1992 and the Sydney Olympics, he went round Australia looking to physiologically profile athletes to work out which athletes would be suited to certain sports to get them to get them to compete in the 2000 Olympics. And he said you shouldn't worship physical talent. What we should be worshipping is or developing is psychological talent. So not talent, but characteristics. So hard work, effort, intensity, perseverance. Because he was saying this year's pole vaulter could be next year's sprinter, could be next year, the year after rugby league player. You just can't really tell. But in terms of when you get a talented player, we do know that early specialisation is linked to injuries because they're constantly playing the same sport. The evidence shows you want young people, so 12 to 13, participating in more than one sport. A lot of times they don't. So, for example, in England, we have football Premiership soccer academies where they'll be taking players at 9 and under, and I guess as they play more, they'll probably have less time to play other sports. Um, and it can lead to overuse injuries. It can also lead to staleness, as in terms of people burnout. So we know burnout is not just, but burnout is related to three constructs. It's about, as you would imagine, physical and mental exhaustion, but it's also about people devaluing what their accomplishments, and also having a complete lack of enjoyment and sense of worth of what they've done. And when players specialise early, there's an increased risk of them getting burnout, which is not good, because ultimately it leads to dropout because they don't enjoy what they're doing. So yeah, I think we have to be very, very careful about that. But then it's difficult because the age at which people are, making it in high level sport, if you look at tennis, is actually can be quite young, and they don't get there without this specialisation. It's just, I do often think, is being an elite athlete good for your health? And it probably isn't, in terms, because we know that if you look at physically, you can have a lot. If you look at, say, rugby union players, they're going to have lots of injuries, lots of surgeries. But then we also know as well that there's a higher prevalence of mental health illness among elite athletes than there are the general population. Uh, yeah, I often do think about that. Is yeah, and it is tough, and that's where the leadership comes in, about creating a supportive environment which players feel that they can open up about their feelings.
Based on your research, do you think it's possible to achieve at the highest levels of elite performance in a way that is psychologically healthy?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think there's a great example of this is Andy Fowler, who coaches Ireland. Now on Netflix was a documentary which covered the Six Nations over a couple of years, and one of their players, Andrew Porter, spoke about his own mental health. This was from the first series, and Andy Farrell, the Ireland coach, is also now the coach of the British and Irish Lions, who are touring Australia in a few weeks' time. He spoke out about the environment that he's created, in which he wants people to open up about their mental health and to feel comfortable talking about their mental health. I think with the right coach, I think definitely, and I think it's much more productive, and it's much happier environment for players, in which they can feel open. They don't feel stigmatized talking about their mental health, because we know that there is a stigma, particularly with the elite athletes, about seeking help due to perceptions of not being seen to be mentally tough, or if it gets that leaked to the media. So, and the best coaches, the young coaches coming through now, can do that, and they're doing it really, really well.
That's very gratifying to hear, and a bit of a relief, because if you said it's impossible, then I'm like, oh, well, I guess I should cancel the podcast.
That this is done
Mm.
this way is absolutely vital, absolutely vital.
That is lovely, lovely, lovely to hear. Not just for me, it's lovely to hear for the world. Obviously, I want a world in which people can be able to get that joy of expressing themselves through performance in a way that is fulfilling and meaningful and brings meaning and purpose to their lives, and not in a way that their self-worth is dependent on achieving a particular kind of caliber of performance. I want to ask more about your research, and we've just kind of started to dig into this area when you're talking about mental health. You obviously also do research on coping and emotions among athletes. Can you talk to me a little bit about that research?
Yeah, so I've done quite a lot of research. So a lot of my early research was with a professional rugby union. So we actually did one study where we included a New Zealand All Black who was playing in Ireland at the time, and we looked at how they coped over a period of 28 days. And what we did is we identified some of these more effective coping strategies. Um, and coping with stress is really important for a number of reasons. One, it predicts performance, but it also predicts well-being. So coping effectiveness is the extent to which you can alleviate the negative effects of a stressor. And, so we know that. Well, I did a meta-analysis where we looked at, compared lots of different studies with lots of different performance metrics about which are the most effective coping strategies. And we found that strategies in which you try to regulate the stressor are much more effective for performance, because we can react. We can have like an approach response to coping, where we try and solve the stressor, we try and problem solve, we try and seek information, which is all very effective. But there's also strategies such as goal disengagement, and you might think, who's going to disengage from a goal? But I've done research with professional rugby union players who have reported on occasion standing in a position so they can't receive the ball after making a stressor because they don't feel they feel too stressed, they feel anxious.
Can you give me an example of a stressor?
Yeah, sorry, the stressor might be so I'm talking rugby union, it could be, we have a number of stressors, but a physical stressor might be missing a tackle, kicking a ball out on the full. A mental stressor might be making a tactical mistake.
Mhm.
Yeah, choosing the wrong person to
Gotcha. So
tackle.
you're in the middle of the thing and you screw up in some way.
Yes, and
And
then
how do you
yeah,
address that?
yeah. So yeah, I should have mentioned it. And then what we've done is, so we've looked at stressors. So what are the likely stressors that these players face? And we found that physical errors were the most highly cited stressors among these professional union players. So yeah, as I say, missing a tackle, kicking a ball out on a full, uh, uh, hitting a poor pass. These were the most cited stressors. And then what we did, we looked at is how they cope with these stressors. So during the matches, what did they do to cope? And we found strategies such as increasing concentration, so focusing on their next job, blocking out negative thoughts of a mistake, increasing effort, making a conscious effort to continue trying hard. These were all highly effective coping strategies among these professional union players, and I think we can learn a lot from that. I've also done some. There's also instances, which is really important, where they didn't make any efforts to cope whatsoever. So we know that stress and anxiety impacts our decision making. It can be a source of distraction. So if we're distracted by a mistake, so we may have dropped a ball, for example. The kickoff comes, we've dropped the ball, the first play of the match. Essentially, you feel as though you've let your teammates down, and then that can then impact how you think and feel. So you feel anxious, but then it also impacts your decision making, which can then impact what you do next. And so, and there's been times where players have done that and they've not really made any efforts to cope. So they've not gone through a routine of thought stopping, deep breathing, for example. And I think that in itself is a really interesting finding from a coaching perspective, from a psychological perspective. It's about when people are getting stressed, it's about making sure that they use some form of coping strategies. And that's one thing I work with when I work with players. It's about understanding who you are, how you respond to stress, but then equally about making sure that you at least attempt to do something, as opposed to just head in the clouds. Oh, I've made a mistake. What am I going to do? And just head's gone kind of thing. And it's about getting out of those negative emotions as quick as possible, and that's via coping.
I have a bunch of questions. My first question, it feels sort of implied by what you're saying, but I do want to double check and see if my assumption is accurate. When players don't deploy any coping strategies, they have a stressor and they just don't do anything. I'm assuming that the outcome is worse. Is that a fair assumption?
Uh, we didn't really look at that specifically, but you can imagine it would be. And even if the outcome isn't worse, it's certainly worse for their psychological well-being, because they're letting the
Mhm.
stress grow and grow and grow without making any opportunity to taking any chance to kind of lower it. But yeah, the meta-analysis that we did would indicate that those sorts of behavioural responses to a stressful situation they're not conducive to higher performance levels.
Gotcha. And then the second question that I have is, you mentioned, some deep breathing, you mentioned a coping ritual, and you said a couple of things in terms of ways to cope that I kind of went, but how? So specifically, you said, increasing concentration or blocking out negative thoughts. How do you do that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of increasing concentration, what you would focus on specific elements of a role in your. So, for example, say you're a flanker, open side flanker. We'll talk rugby, and it might be that increased concentration would be focusing on your shoulder position, your leg drive on your next tackle, saying those key words to yourself. So you're not thinking about the missed tackle you just made. It's right. Next tackle, right, shoulder position, leg drive, might be two key words. They're one thing that I think are really, really good for increasing concentration. And what was the other example? Was it relaxation or was it?
You said increased
Okay, yeah,
concentration, and then you said blocking negative thoughts.
yeah. So that's a good answer. There's a couple of ways you can do that, and it obviously depends on the situation, the sport that you're in. So, for example, if you're a golfer, you've probably got more time, so might even visualize a stop sign in your mind, and then say the word stop. The same with a rugby player. If you're on the pitch, you can just say to yourself stop, and that's you stopping those negative thoughts, and then you focus on what you want to do next. So then you would incorporate your keywords. If you're the flanker, it's shoulder position, leg drive. So you stop, visualize a stop sign if you have time to do that. If not, some players even have like a red dot. If you've got wrist tape, you might have a red dot that you put on your wrist, and that's just a reminder. You look at that, right? Stop, right? It's just a line in the sand. We're not thinking about the mistakes now. Now we're focusing on these positive things that we want to do. Our next involvement in the game. And
Do they have a blue or a green dot on the other wrist? Like,
they could do
stop
that.
that, go there?
The ones I see mainly are just like the golfer. He won the British Open. He had just a red dot on his glove, and it was more. I think sometimes it's the positive stuff is a bit more natural to do. The harder things are the stopping the negative.
Mm.
Yeah.
I imagine it'd be really challenging because my understanding is that our brains are pretty terrible at processing negatives or absences of information. And so stop X brings our attention to X, whereas go Y is kind of, focusing on kind of where we want to be. I want to repeat what I heard you say because I think it's important. This thing of increasing our concentration, the how that I heard from you is number one, narrowing the focus. And number two, I heard a focus on the kind of immediate physical. So, like shoulder position, leg, I forgot the other thing you said, but this immediate physical. And it's one of the things that I bring into my work all the time, which is how do we bring ourselves into the present moment? Our minds are time travelers. Our minds are like, oh my gosh, I just missed that tackle 1 minute ago, and I'm going to like hang out there for a while. But our bodies are always and only in this present moment. And so using our bodies to like lasso our emotional state and our attention back into the present moment is what I just heard you say is a tactic. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, our minds are like, and it's not just the past; it's also the future. Like I've been sat in interviews, and I've been like, "Oh God, what question is going to be coming next?" I've not even answered this question. And I'm like, and so yeah, it's really important that we try and do that. And it doesn't just have to be physical; it could also be psychological keywords that you use. And it all depends on the individual's preference. So then, when working with the coach or the psychologist, that's when you develop those key words that you would then use and you have as your go-to when you need them in a stressful situation. But it's important because another thing that you mentioned as well, that the negative effects of something is much stronger than something that's positive. So we're more affected by negative events or mistakes than we are successful things that we've done. Uh, and so it is difficult, and that's why it requires time and practice, and that's why if we have these coaches who make training hard, who make it competitive, it gives us the opportunity to practice these coping strategies it gives us the practice of performing at high intensity, so that when we then go into competition, we're used to the level of intensity is not a massive drop. It's that they're very similar, and that's really important as well. You fall to the level of your training. You can't expect someone
Yeah.
to rise up above that much. So it's about you fall down to the level of your training. So if your level of intensity is high, which comes from the coach, it comes from players being accountable, then that helps you perform under pressurized situations. So everything's all interlinked.
Yeah. This is again a message that's come through over and over again from the guests that I've had on the pod, which is the importance of training to be under pressure, of practicing being under pressure. That the only way we get good at being under pressure is by practicing it, but that it absolutely is something that can be practiced and can be strengthened.
No, that is. But also, you give people the tools when they're under that pressure. So, for example,
Yes.
you can create pressurized situations, and then I'm not sure all coaches would then say, well, this is how you deal with it, this is how you cope with it. Quite often it's just let the players learn, but actually we can accelerate and improve their ability to cope under pressure by giving them a different coping strategies. I think that's really important to do that. So, for example,
Mm.
the key words, the thought stopping, positive self-talk, deep breathing exercises. There's a whole list of different coping strategies that you can do. And I've done some interventions with players, and that's one thing that we did is we gave them the opportunity to practice it, because it takes time. So I did a study with an England international golfer who was a youth golfer at the time, and we looked at effective and ineffective coping strategies. And one of the things that he did under stress was he would care about what other players are doing, and what other people are thinking of him, which would result in him either increasing his pre-shot routine. So he wouldn't do his normal 2 swings, he would then just rush it. So we worked on this teaching him these different coping strategies, and then so the next time he went out, he did the same thing. He rushed it, but now he was aware of it. He was aware of what he was doing, and actually, so over time, he learned not to use these ineffective behavioural routines. But it took time and practice, and that's why having this high. It's not just about sport. It's about anything, any form of performance domain, whether it's public speaking. It's about being able to practice under pressure and practice your coping strategy, so that when you do it for real, you can then perform better. You've got something to fall back on as well, I think. And that's important, knowing that you've got something to fall back on. Knowing that you've got belief in your ability to cope is important.
One of the things you just said, so much, everything you just said is so important, but one of the things you just said that I really want to highlight there is that the first step for this young golfer was not, I've fixed the problem. The first step was, I am continuing to repeat the problem, but I am now aware of it. And it is that awareness
Absolutely.
that is essential for it's and that precedes our ability to choose anything different.
Absolutely. Awareness is massive. It's so important for anything in life, isn't it? And awareness of who we are and what we do and how we behave, and how we behave in ways that are not conducive to our own well-being and also performance as well. But it starts at awareness, I think, and then we build on from there.
And
Yeah.
and in my experience, awareness without judgment. Because it's so tempting to go, oh, look at, I'm rushing my pre-swing routine. That's so terrible. I shouldn't be doing that. As opposed to, okay, in this circumstance, I noticed this happen. I rushed my pre-swing routine, and then I got this outcome. Okay, what would I prefer to do differently? Very different kind of approach that leads to very different outcomes, I imagine.
Absolutely. And I think with this player, he was a bit nervous. He was a young player. He'd only just broken into the England setup. He didn't feel as though he maybe belonged there. But so we actually, we worked on that and changing that about, this is your time. It's your shot. You do what you need to do. Other people don't matter. Other people don't care. And yeah, and I said it, and I also said it's about taking the courage to do what you need to do at that time. We said, be courageous, and that was one of his key words. Is key phrase is be courageous. And for him, that meant actually just taking that little bit extra to do what he needed to do. And with time, he got that.
I love these key phrases. I remember at the Winter Olympics a couple of years ago, there was a Japanese curler, and the camera zoomed in on her hand, and she had written on her hand, I'm a good curler. I have confidence. Let's have fun.
Yeah. Wow. That's brilliant, is that? Yeah. And those things we can all do, whether we're going into a speech, whatever we're doing. If you're going to a speech, you take your laptop in there. You could have those on your laptop, a little sticker just to remind yourself. Positive affirmations are really important. And I would say that all comes from preparation, knowing that you've prepared well, that you can be confident in who you are and what you can do. Yeah, it's so important. So important.
You took the silver medal at the British Open in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I am a huge fan, by the way. I was a martial artist and a boxer in a former life. That's my background. So, what did you learn? My question is, what did you learn from that experience that relates to this conversation we've just been having and the research that you do?
Yeah. So I've actually got I'm competing again at the British Open in 4 weeks' time. So yeah.
Go hard.
Yeah, I will be going hard.
You're a good Brazilian jiu-jitsuist. You have confidence, have fun.
Yeah. So what I've learned from that, I learned lots and lots and lots, so much from that. One thing I learned is that I made mental mistakes in there through reacting to stress. So I coped. I adopted my coping strategies. But fairly early on, the game plan went out the window. A bit like a rabbit in a headlights. That was, my first big competition. And it is tough. It's not, you've competed on martial arts. It's, it's two of you giving it your all. And so I learned one is about wanting to create a challenge mindset. So focusing on what I want to do and adhering to that. And also making sure I cope. So like the golfer, the 17-year-old golfer who didn't go through his routine, went off plan and did things that didn't relate to him. And so I make a conscious effort to do that. And I've competed subsequently and I've got much, much better at that, about generating, a positive mindset. So not worrying about, am I going to get, choked out? Am I going to hurt myself? Am I going to get made a fool of? I don't even think about those things now. I'm focusing on my training, what I've done, and what my game plan is, and how I'm going to put my game plan on the opponent. And that's what I'll be doing in 4 weeks' time. Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about it, because you're going out there and you're giving it your all, and you're seeing if you've got it or not. So, but yeah, that's one thing I've learned, and that's one thing I'll be trying to do, and that's one thing that winning or losing, obviously I'd like to win, but it's more about making sure that I give my best, and I can only do that if I'm going through having this right mindset and this right approach, and that's what I'm going to be trying to do. It's not, it's easier said than done sometimes, but that's what I'm aiming for. And like you say, I can give my best and still lose, and if I do, that's fair enough. But I don't want to lose because I've made mental mistakes. I want to give my best, and then if I lose, I lose. That's fair enough.
I had the rugby player Norm Maxwell on the podcast last week, and he said the greatest failure in life is not that we lose what we do. The greatest failure is that we don't give ourselves the opportunity to touch our potential.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's so true, isn't it? And we can only do that by giving out. Yeah, we have to. Yeah, brilliant.
Putting ourselves in these challenge situations. Yeah. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me. I've loved this conversation. I could talk to you for hours. I've so appreciated being able to learn from you and your research and your wisdom and your insight and your experience. It's been really great. And I just appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. And likewise, I've taken a lot away from this conversation. Lots of seeds there that I'll be thinking about.
Thank you so much for listening. Please do let me know your feedback. You can reach me on hello@kylacolbin.com. One of the things I loved about talking to Adam is the way that he defines things helps me see those things in the wild and then nurture them in myself. So, for example, this concept of self-referenced success, now that I have language for it, I can hold myself to account for it. Like, am I measuring success based on an outcome that depends on someone else? and therefore is outside of my control? Or am I measuring success based on how I showed up? Thanks again for listening. Hunger and Heart is brought to you by the Crusaders Leadership Programme. Whether you're coaching under fives or a professional team, we all want the same thing: to build a culture of trust, to get the best out of your people, and to grow players into leaders. The Crusaders Leadership Program lets you get up close and personal with some of the greatest rugby legends of all time. People like Sir Wayne Smith, Sam Whitelock, Kieran Read. You'll connect with a global group of ambitious, caring coaches from a range of codes and backgrounds, and most importantly, you'll gain skills and techniques to drive impact and outcomes for your team. The Crusaders Leadership Program is a 2-week, high-intensity virtual experience. It is delivered exclusively online, accessible from anywhere. Hunger and Heart listeners get 10% off the full price of the program. Use the code HUNGER at checkout. You can find out more about the Crusaders Leadership Program at crusadersleadership.com. That's crusadersleadership.com. Hunger and Heart is created by BOMA and the entire BOMA team, including Tito Bernal, Ray Jangle, Hannah Hudson, Johanna Coxon, Sunil Unka, and me, Kyla Colbin. Thanks for listening.